Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be speaking about a rather subtle energy shift taking place in the sky right now, where it is Chiron, a minor astrological power player. And when I say minor, well, this is where it really depends on the astrologer, because some astrologers do tend to give Chiron a lot of importance. And as I'll go in this recording, I'll explain its symbolism and you can understand why. While other astrologers do consider Chiron a minor astrological power player like all the other asteroids, even so, there are moments when its symbolism is much more influential, and one of those moments is right now, because today Chiron is standing still in the sky and preparing to go retrograde. And whenever any planet stands still in the sky, its symbolism is greatly amplified, and we're also starting to embody it much more deeply than at any other time. And Chiron has a lot to do with our wounds, with our wounding, with our vulnerabilities, with our weak points. For some of us, these are things that we apparently inherited, or they have to do with the distant past, where it stems from, our situations, from education, from our familiar background, from the way society used to interact with us when we were very, very young. For other people, it is deeply karmic, sourcing from their ancestral heritage, from their families, maybe from previous existences, while for other people still, it might be something sheerly genetic, it might be something more physical than, psychological or spiritual or karmic. But regardless of what our wounding, our wounds, our vulnerabilities, our weaker points are, they are still so very important in our identity, for example, who we choose to be in this life, in this incarnation, at certain specific moments in our lives, when we have to make important choices, decisions, when we have to reflect things that other people project on us, for example, within our relationships, within our relation with the self, for example. And very, very many times our wounds and our wounding, regardless of what nature it has, it plays a much more important role in everything that makes us unique and distinctive and specific than it meets the eye. In many cases, we can't even really imagine on how a predominant factor of our wounds actually were at certain moments when we made big life choices, decisions, preferences, options, etc. For some people, the entirety of their career, of their life path, actually stems from a wound. Like, let me just give you an example. How many doctors, nurses, healers, any kind of health practitioner, even holistic healers there are in the world who felt this deep inner calling when witnessing someone they love dearly go through an illness, or let's say an accident, a misfortunate event that, required a lot of nurture, healing, etc. When you ask a doctor why they became a doctor, a lot of times they are going to tell us either that they saw someone in their family go through a very tough illness and that really, really motivated them as they were a child. Other people simply will answer that they always felt this calling, this empathy, this compassion towards those who are wounded, those who are, let's say, vulnerable or going through a very difficult phase in their lives. And this has always been, a part of their souls from early childhood. And of course, others still might have been deeply inspired in their younger years by another doctor or a nurse or a healthcare practitioner that they saw doing their work as they were a child, a family member, a neighbor, someone they knew and respected. So, All of these are actually based on wounding, even if they're not like our own personal wounds. In one way or another, we still had what it took within us in order to understand in a very deep, in a very personal, in a very, how should I even say, in a very profound way, what being a victim of wounding, regardless of their nature, has to be like in order for someone to answer this inner calling to make a difference. And this is one of the most beautiful and the most inspirational examples, so to speak, because naturally there are the anti-examples, there are the negative examples, but those are just as important because they can show us how everything can go wrong so very quickly when our wounds and our wounding is not managed in a very healthy way. For example, serial killers and those people who do a lot of harm, that obsession, that impulse, the wound itself, like just like a wounded animal, it just bites, it retaliates, it misinterprets reality and everything. It sees all of it as a threat. So very many of those people who embody that wounded animal were victims of something, an aggression, oppression, whatever, and they just couldn't process it in a very healthy way. So it kind of created a different kind of monster. And ironically speaking, nothing in the universe happens without a reason. So even those people who embody the more negative, the more gruesome side of what our wounds can create, or better said, co-create, well, even those play a divine role, basically. Because even the person who causes the wound is a very important power player, because if no one embodies that role, well, healers are not gonna be born out of that experience, and ultimately evolution doesn't take place, but to perceive things in such a rather, cold and detached manner, well, you need a certain kind of philosophical approach to it, because when it comes to wounds, it is never really objective because there is always subjectivity attached to it. And now let's take a look at the symbolism of Chiron and why Chiron actually represents the wounds and wounding in astrology. So in order to take a better look, we have to examine the mythology of Chiron. Now Chiron was a centaur who was kind of atypical, because unlike his peers who were great champions, warriors, I do believe archers and spearmen, so they really possessed a talent for combat, tactics, and basically to create a tactical advantage through strength and intelligence. Chiron chose to be a philosopher, a healer, a wise person, basically, someone who embodies the strength and virtue of wisdom, and of course, sharing that wisdom, experience, knowledge, and understanding of the world with others. Now, of course, his atypical nature was not a big disadvantage for Chiron, quite the opposite, because he excelled at all of this wisdom, understanding, philosophy, obtaining knowledge, basically. He was a very, very skillful healer because he did his own research. He learned from healing, so of course his craft, so to speak, became better and better and better, and ultimately he was so respected, and however he chose to express his distinctiveness gained the sympathy of the highest forces. So that's how he became teacher and, of course, mentor, basically, to Ares, god of war. Or in other versions of this legend, Hercules. But this doesn't matter as much, because this just proves how very respected and how very devoted to his craft he truly was. And this is where his legend, the mythology, takes a not so favorable turn, because once Mars was just testing his strength in a gesture of playfulness, carelessness, so to speak, and he shot an arrow, which accidentally got Chiron in the thigh, and that created a very deep, painful, and agonizing wound. Now, of course, the wound did ruin, in a way, Chiron's normality, Chiron's life, because he could never recover from it. And as I said, it left him in agony, it left him in so much pain. But at the same time, the wounding itself was also a very strong teacher to Mars, because he felt terrible, he felt so very, very bad for wounding the person he respected so very much, and the person who taught him how to become a venerable warrior, how to become basically dignified. And this, let's say, karmic event, this play out of fate, well, this kind of was the ultimate teacher to Mars, that diligence and to take care with your actions, with the intent you set, because that is what the arrow and the shooting of arrow symbolizes, the intention, the power of the intention, that also has to be in some kind of control, because ultimately every single warrior is responsible for their gestures, for their actions, reactions, everything that has to follow the expression of one's will. So basically this was a very, very strong lesson for the, symbolically speaking, aggressor as well, because as I said, Mars did not intend this. It was just a game which went wrong. But at the same time, even though Chiron was the victim, victimhood actually did a lot of unexpected, so to speak, miracles for him personally, because on one hand, not being able to heal his wound and being so very painful inspired him to do even greater research to try to heal himself, and also the wound itself made him that much more compassionate. It is one thing to have the knowledge of how to heal, and it is a totally another when you have the knowledge but also you personally feel what a victim of wounding goes through each and every second. So this is why Chiron is the wounded healer, because he is not just someone who knows and has the knowledge to it, but it is also someone who faced the wounding, who faced the pain. And this is exactly where his legend takes a really miraculous turn, so to speak, because the gods saw the pain that Chiron was going through each and every day, but at the same time they saw the dignity, they saw the virtue, they saw that Chiron did not allow this to get to him. It did not change his dignity, his honor in any way, shape or form. Quite the contrary, he put up a massive display of strength not to allow his wound to make him, basically a victim, to take away his power, to take away his devotion, his goal, his purpose to be a healer. So the gods turned him into a constellation. They made him an immortal being, where even though the source of the pain and the pain itself, the wound, disappeared because he became immortal, the memory of the wound, the experience of going through it, that stayed for him, to the eternity of time. Even you're immortal being, when you become a constellation, time is no longer an issue. So the wound itself became immortal just as well, yet it serves a really, really good and noble purpose. It is just the memory of what it feels like to be vulnerable, and this memory is a core determinant, so to speak, of what it means to be a healer, because everyone may be, including Chiron, an immortal divine being, what he became. Well, maybe even such a being has moments of difficulty when they have to perhaps make a difficult choice, when they have to look at things from a very detached way. And each time this happens, they can just recall and remember the wound, and the experience can help them make the right choice. And of course, where Chiron is in our personal charts, so not the transiting Chiron, but rather the natal Chiron, speaks a lot about us and how our wounds, our disadvantages, everything that may have hurt us or represented any kind of blockage or inconvenience in this life, which of course led to a wound, how all of that became a very inspirational factor in our life stories, and how those wounds shape and formed us to become the person who we are today. And this is exactly why astrology, individually speaking, is not really set in stone, because the pattern is there, absolutely. Chiron, which shows the nature of the wound, which house, which sign, which degree, etc., is also there. But what we do with it, now that is where everyone is so very different, because that shows how we choose to alchemize the wound. And we can respect the pattern to play out as it is in the stars, but the energetic configuration, the frequency, the learned and integrated life experience is ours and just ours alone. So if basically the natal chart, let's say, is the skeleton, well, then what we do with it is the meat on the bones. And that can play out in so very many different ways, respecting basically the same skeleton. So this is how things are, written in the stars, but they're also written in deep inside your soul. And that book, symbolically speaking, the book of faith, is something that basically writes itself every single second of each day. The number of the pages may be predetermined, but the context, the essence of the writing, now that is where we're truly co-authors ourselves. But today it's not really about the natal Chiron, but rather the transiting one, where, for example, the transiting Chiron usually stays in the same part of the sky for a lot of time. It doesn't move that very quickly. So it's always an influence that is there to stay for a lot of months. And it can always have a certain correlation with our natal wounding. Because, wounds, even if they, take place in a totally different area of our lives, they still remind us of our core wounding. And right now, this transiting Chiron is in the sign of Aries at 12 degrees 55 minutes, more precisely. But what matters is that Aries, regardless in which part of our personal charts it is still an energy of the self. It is still the energy of the initiator, a part of our lives where we have to display passion, bravery, courage, warrior spirit. It is also part of our lives which, is deeply, deeply personal. It is what we inherited with our genetics. It is also something which has to do with our instincts, our natal wiring, so to speak, our brains, our emotional configuration. And it's also a part of our lives where we are continuously being reborn. We are preserving a very, very primordial energy, a primordial state of things, because Aries is also the first breath. It is the energy of being born. So it is very, very natural and nature oriented, so to speak. It might be the most natural part of ourselves, our lives. So, as I said, depending on where Aries falls into your personal chart. And Chiron in this part of the sky, especially now when it is standing still, its symbolism is amplified. It is almost like we are invited to live it, experience it deeper than at any other times. In the sign of Aries, it is all about our triggers, it is all about survival, everything that basically holds a threat and of any kind, any nature, that which basically blocks us from being who it is that we are, from living life within our own freedom, our own preferences, our own choices. So how this energy of Chiron standing still in the sky may influence us collectively is very straightforward. Also because the same part of the sky as in Aries has the goddess Eris, planetoid Eris in there, squaring Pluto. So this is protest, this is freedom, this is protecting rights, freedom, sovereignty, choice, all of that. But personally, this energy reminds us that regardless of what happens to us, especially who irritates us, what really pushes our buttons, our triggers, what makes us very angry and irritated, may that be another person, may that be the world in general, may that be the times we're living, a group of people, something, anything, even something karmic of nature, which just bothers us, blocks us, irritates us. Well, we always have a choice. Of course, we cannot pretend that we are totally invulnerable, that it is not triggering us, it is not causing us pain and wounds, perhaps frustration, perhaps depression. So being totally honest with ourselves is the first and healthiest course of action. This isn't where we have to ignore or deny or apply toxic positivity and just make it magically go away. But this is also Aries the warrior, what we do with it. Because whenever we are triggered, whenever, our buttons are pressed, we have this energetic build-up inside of us, and we need to express that one way or another. So this is where, what do we do with it? Well, the first thing is that whatever we choose to do with that energy, we must make sure, on one hand, that we do not wound others in the same way, and on the other hand, that we won't do anything which makes our own suffering, our own pain, that much bigger, that much more severe. And ultimately, this inner power, this inner force, when our triggers are being pushed, energy is basically energy. Yes, it may come through as anger, it may come through as, let's say, intolerance, it may come through as an impulse to lash out, to speak our truth, to speak our hurts. But at the same time, this energy can also be transformed into the strongest motivation and the strongest faith, inner strength basically, to either work or attract or do anything possible in our lives with, through life's terms, of course, which is needed to transform the situation or whatever is irritating us, whatever is causing our woundings. So today and up until the very end of the week, when we have this extremely powerful Chiron, we might be intuitively, instinctually, even unconsciously be reminded of our wounds and wounding. We might be triggered a little bit more than usual, but at the same time, all of this is meant to give us the strength and motivation needed to make something with our wounding and the patterns that caused, so that we can transform it and change it, and either just simply walk away from it, or for us individually to become forces of change, forces of help, perhaps solidarity, compassion, even inspiration, to help other people with the same wounds transform their lives. So in this period, speaking about what happened to you, for example, writing down your story or expressing your story through any way, shape or form, which highlights your wounding and what you have done with it, how you transformed your life, how it inspired you and motivated you to become a better person or to overcome your obstacles, your limitations, even things which you thought almost impossible, and you've done it because you had that big motivation inside of you due to your wound. During this time, it would be a really good period to express this in any way, and not just the creation itself. May it be a song, a painting, a blog entry, a poem, or just simply making a video and, evoking everything that's happened to you, expressing yourself, regardless of the shape and form. It can help other people do the same and see their own patterns. Basically, through sharing your story, you also share your strength, your tactics, for example, what you have used, how you coped with your situation, and it can really, really represent a powerful motivational force for other people. And at the same time, we also have a totally different aspect in the sky, which might not do with Chiron itself, but it does highlight this energy, where we have the sun in the sign of Cancer, the third decan, so the Piscean part of Cancer, which has a lot to do with the past, with our own inner creativity, self-expression, our emotional equilibrium, our unconscious mind. But this is where it's not that heavily mysterious unconscious part, but that which is almost at the surface, that which we can tap into, if this makes sense. And Neptune is in the sign of Pisces. So this is a really strong healing energy of artistic, inspirational, spiritual, psychological nature that has a healing quality to it, where it just dissolves the hurt, the pain. It helps you basically alchemize, transform, transmute all of the emotions you naturally attribute to the past and events of the past. So this is, it's almost like going back in time, but more like psychologically, mentally, through a self-psychoanalysis, and transforming the lived experience, transforming the emotions you attribute them. This might not be very easy, because, the sun also opposes Pluto, and whenever a planet opposes Pluto, well, it is a moment when we have to confront the shadow, confront some kind of big truth, confront the past, or perhaps a really strong reality check. For example, everything that we do not have power over, everything that we cannot influence, everything that doesn't depend on us, there is also this side of the story, because we would like very, very much to, alchemize our wounds and everything. All of us want to heal, all of us want to have a healthier way of being, so to speak, but not always everything depends on us, especially the feelings, reactions, choices of other people, the world, society around us, and even sometimes karma and fate is not in our hands. So there will always be compromises. There are always going to be things which apparently take away our power, and things which we have to surrender in life. But none of this doesn't mean that we cannot have an innovative, ingenious, approach of doing things differently. And that can only be done by, first of all, acknowledging where we don't have any kind of power over, and how can we find something alternative to have at least a small influence over it. Like, let me just give you an example. You might have no power over, how your local community is and how it makes you feel, etc. But if that is a source of pain in your life, you can leave. You may not change the world and change your surroundings, especially when it comes to like principles, a lifestyle, life views, education, etc. But you can just detach and, isolate yourself from that by going to a different place. Or one of the most typical examples for this is when you love a person and they don't love you back. And at the end of the day, it's always gonna be the same. You just choose your life to love yourself, accept the situation and move on. And that's about it. So in conclusion, this is a very, very good period. A couple of days where we can truly reflect and deeply contemplate of just how our wounds and our wounding, and as I said, regardless if we inherit this, if it's a karmic wound, if it's something that happened to us in this incarnation in our younger years, or it doesn't really matter of what the source of the wound is, but we can look back and see just how it influenced our lives and how it kind of turned us into healers in our own right, where very quickly when we see the same patterns, the same wound in the life, in the heart of someone else, we immediately, almost instinctually, compassionately take action and try to, symbolically speaking, bandage the wound, because we do see ourselves, who we used to be when we were victims, in that other person. And at the same time, if we are dealing with fresh wounds, wounds that are not healed yet, wounds that are still very alive inside of us, or some that we just picked up in the now, in the very recent past, well, at least this can give us a really good overview and to be able to see the big picture of what the lesson in our current wounds are and how this will change the person that we are becoming in the future. So by kind of knowing what hurts us, what causes our pain, our deepest wounds right now in this present moment, we can already anticipate the future of what's gonna be built on the healing, what's gonna be built on regeneration, recovery, and of course, where it is that we can play an important role in the lives of others as healers, official or unofficial, even if you are just in the position of a family member, a friend, an acquaintance, or you just see it happening to a total stranger, we can still choose in those moments to become healers. And the deeper our wounds go, the more experience, the more personal knowledge we have to share. So this concludes today's recording. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support my work and channel, you can donate in the PayPal link in the description below. With this being said, thank you again. Wish everyone a wonderful week. Until next time, bye for now.